Generosity is a paradox. At least that's the sentiment and the statement made by this wide-ranging secular study done on the idea, the concept of generosity. They put together all their findings in this book called The Paradox of Generosity, wherewith they do a deep dive into what it looks like to share, to serve, to bless, to give, and how that happens in and through Americans today. This wide-ranging study made so many powerful and peculiar findings, but one of the most basic ones, if I could help to wrap your mind around what actually happens, what they mean when they talk about this paradox, this thing that you wouldn't expect to be, but consistently over and over again, this is what happens concerning generosity. They found over and over again among people who are generous, and they have lots of definitions of what generosity looks like and what generosity doesn't look like. They're not talking about people who write somebody's name in a will. They're talking about people who use their own willpower every day, every week, every month with consistency to serve, to bless, to give, to share. They found this paradox to where those who live with generosity actually have in their biology, in their psychological makeup, in their physical body, differences from those who don't. One of the most striking was they found in people who were consistently generous higher levels of dopamine. Like consistently higher levels of dopamine. You know what dopamine is? Dopamine is that little kick that you get every time your phone buzzes to tell you that somebody has messaged you, and you're like, ooh, who wants to know something from me? Like that is dopamine. And they found inside of people who were generous higher levels of dopamine than they could find consistently inside of people who were not generous. And actually, they found the converse. They found inside of people who did not practice generosity, did not have time or space to serve or to give or to share with any kind of consistency, they found higher levels of cortisol inside of them, which leads to and led to stress, depression, and mental health disorders. Could it be, at least based on their findings, that some of the mental health crisis that we experience, that we love to talk about in America, does not come because of what's happening outside and around us, but because nothing comes out of us for others? See, the other very stark finding that they found, among many, many things they found, is they found that Americans tend to think of themselves as being way more generous than they actually are. They found that 86.1% of all people in America give less than 2% of their income away. Less than 2%. That 86% give away less than 2%. That doesn't mean just to church. That's to anything. That's to hospitals, that's to schools, to foundations, to nonprofits, to any. We love to talk about the generosity of America. Their finding was that 86% plus of Americans give less than 2%. In fact, the average American gives away about 1% of whatever comes to them. 1%. And they found a surprising reality in their minds that, if you've been tracking with us in our series for others, would not be so surprising to you. They actually found that the more money people make, the smaller that percentage actually is. Not the amount, but the percentage. They also found that only 23.6% of Americans actually volunteer, give of their time and energy in any way in a calendar year. Not in a week, not in a month, in a year. Meaning that over 76% of people in America never serve, help, or assist anybody in any way if it's just for others. It's a paradox that somehow not making life all about yourself would make your life better, but that's what they found. Not because they believe in Jesus, but because they leaned into the data. Not because they have some deep faith point that they're trying to prove. Both of the people who are the key writers in this are not people of faith. They're researchers, they're social scientists, and they found that life is better when you live it for others. William Enright, a professor at the University of Indiana, said it this way, that it's a sociological fact. By giving ourselves away, we flourish. We flourish. You know, that's been my prayer in this collection of sermons for others that we've been building week after week after week in these installments together, that you would begin to see, that your eyes would begin to open, that life truly is better when you make it not about yourself. When you choose to wake up, when you choose to live, when you choose to leverage some of what God has entrusted to you for others. So today I want to take you on a journey through the scriptures. You didn't come for a social science lesson, and I didn't come to give you one. I want to take you on a journey through the scriptures, through one of the most beautiful examples of living for others. It's found in the Old Testament story of a woman named Ruth. And there are many powerful truths, many extrapolations that can be made from her life, her legacy, and her story. But I want to lean in specifically for our purposes today to her commitment, to her willingness and desire to live for others. Now, we are just going to drop ourselves into this book and read lots of scripture today. And I'm going to do my best to connect the dots for those of you that may be unfamiliar with her story. But my prayer is that you would see this powerful woman who makes a commitment in the depths of her soul to live for others. And you see what God does in her because of it and through her with that. Let's get to reading, shall we? The book of Ruth, chapter 1 is where we're going to begin. Let's set the scene with the first 5 verses, shall we? Scripture is recorded this way. In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah left his home and went to live in the country of Moab, taking his wife and 2 sons with him. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife was Naomi. Their 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Epaphrodites from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. And when they reached Moab, they settled there. Then Elimelech died, and Naomi was left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah, the other a woman named Ruth. But about 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion died. This left Naomi alone without her 2 sons or her husband. I would love you for a moment to catch with your mind and your heart the difficult place that Naomi and Ruth and Orpah were in. It's hard for us to wrap our mind around this in a day and age where we, and rightfully so, champion women. Where women lead companies, where women raise families in many instances on their own, where women have to carry all the weight by themselves, where roads are being made by the commitment and the force and the determination of women to make a difference in this world. It's a beautiful thing we're seeing, but that's not the way it's always been. This was a unapologetically patriarchal society. This was a time, a day, a space, a place where if you weren't a man and didn't have a man, you had significant problems, literally just trying to make it from day to day. There was no provision for these women. There was no family line because of the death of Naomi's husband and now the death of her two sons. There was no care for her. There was no protection for her. There was no provision for her. Now, the difference between Naomi and her two daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, was their age. Naomi would have been older by now. Naomi would have seen herself as being, well, my best years are behind me. I guess I'm off the market. The likelihood of me having another man, getting another man, seems slim to none. Whereas Ruth and Orpah, while they had had these beautiful relationships for all we know for 10 years, now both of their husbands have gone on, but they are still young enough to entertain the idea of remarrying again. And not just remarrying for the sake of remarrying to make sure that somehow they would be cared for. They had a little time to rebuild. Nevertheless, we find ourselves 5 verses into the book of Ruth. And now we have 3 women who are in a difficult spot. There are a variety of roads that lead to a difficult reality. I think sometimes when we see people in our own life, in our own community, in our own city, in our own family who find themselves in difficult places, it's very easy for us to write in, to prejudge, to predetermine why they got themselves into that kind of space. If they would have done this, if they would have listened to us, if they wouldn't have been so. And sometimes that is the case. But it is important for us to realize that sometimes people find themselves in a difficult spot, and it's of no fault of their own. Sometimes people find themselves with challenging circumstances, challenging realities that they're having to parse through and work out. And it wasn't because they were irresponsible, and it wasn't because they made terrible decisions, and it wasn't because they didn't meet the standard, and it wasn't because, it's simply because sometimes life happens. And I give you that context here because what we're going to see is a beautiful story of commitment, of sacrifice, of generosity for others. But it wasn't because somebody made terrible decisions. It was simply because of an unfortunate set of circumstances. And now a woman named Naomi, who's on up there in age, has no security, no way of making it through this life. And she has 2 daughters-in-law who have options, but they would have been leaning on one another for at least the last decade. And they've got to decide, they've got to figure out what they're going to do, how they're going to have food to eat, how they're going to have clothes to wear, how they're going to have shelter from the storm. But I start with that backstory, because I think it's important on today that we gain that perspective. Let's keep reading Ruth chapter 1, starting in verse 6, just picking up right where we left off. It says, then Naomi, remember her husband has died and now her sons are dead too. Then Naomi heard in Moab, where she lived, that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. Remember what we had just read is that with her husband, they had moved to Moab because the crops weren't good in Judah. But now she gets word in Moab that, it's fertile again back up in Judah. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law got ready to leave Moab to return to her homeland. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she set out from the place where she had been living. And they took the road that would lead them back to Judah. But on the way, Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go back to your mother's homes, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands and to me. May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage. Remember, this is their pursuit. Then she kissed them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept, all 3 of them. Orpah, Ruth, Naomi, they're all in tears because Naomi's like, y'all need to go back home and to your homeland and may God bless you. And you're like, you don't need to do that. I know we're doing it, but you don't need to do this. No, they said. We want to go with you to your people. But Naomi replied, Why should you go on with me? Can I still give birth to other sons who could grow to be your husbands? No, my daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I am too old to marry again. And even if it were possible, if I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Would you wait for them to grow up and refuse to marry someone else? No, of course not. Things are far more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me. And they wept together. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. There are lots of folk who like to speak about, like to talk about living for others. But only a few folk really be about that life of living for others. Naomi is taking her daughters-in-law with her on her journey back to Judah because they have heard that there is fertile ground, that the crops are abundant again. And so Naomi is going there because she got some family there. She got some kinfolk. And even though her husband has died, and even though they left when the times got tough and went to Moab, she is just hopeful that somebody somewhere might show kindness to her because she is from that land. But on this journey, she recognizes that her daughters-in-law, who she's taking with her, don't have that same privilege. They would be foreigners in Judah because, remember, they were Moabite women who married her sons. And so Naomi, along the way, recognizes that this isn't going to be the easiest spot for them. It's going to be easier for her, potentially, but certainly not for them. And so they ought to go back to where it's easier for them. They ought to go back to where they have a chance to be provided for. Maybe they could, God would bless them with another marriage, and they would be cared for and secure. And she offers this push to them. She thinks it's for their benefit that they go back to Moab. And she convinced one of her daughters-in-law to do it. That's what we read there. Orpah, even though she cried the first time, even though she was sad and said, no, I'm not going to do it, when she continued to listen to the logic of her mother-in-law, she decided, you know what? I think that's best for me, and so I am going to turn and go back. But she could not convince Ruth. You know, even from this little moment here in the book of Ruth, chapter 1, there are some lessons we can learn, some extrapolations we can make to those of us who would decide to live for others. Those of us who would choose to posture ourselves as people of generosity, people who are going to live not just for our own care, not just for our own comfort, but for others. I need you to know this and write this down if you're taking notes today. Not everyone who starts finishes. Not everyone who starts finishes. Orpah started the journey, but she did not finish the journey. Orpah began a life living not for her own good, but for the good of others, specifically her mother-in-law Naomi and even her sister-in-law Ruth. But she started something she was unwilling or uncommitted enough to finish. All the stories I could tell you over my years of walking in a direction that I believe God has set for me and for others that would want to walk that direction. The stories I could tell you of people who would come to me and tell me they were ready to serve. They were ready to give. They were ready to lead. They were ready to help. They were ready to plant their roots in this city and be about its rebuilding, its restoration. They were ready to be someone who would live out our name, believing in people, believing in neighborhoods, believing in our God, that he can do exceedingly abundantly far more than we could ever ask or think. All the stories I could tell you of people who would look me in the eye and tell me they are with me. They are with us. They believe in this vision, heart and soul. And then they turned on the news and they got nervous. And they said, I don't know if I can raise kids in the city. Maybe I can go outside the city, way outside the city, to where it's too far and too inconvenient for me to be a part of that church anymore. And so I just can't. They're all in for others until it's their car that gets broken into, until it's their apartment that gets busted into. They're all in to serve until serving now looks like their weekend consistently being disrupted because they are giving of their time or giving of their energy, and how they give on one morning or one evening affects the rest of the day and even the night. And the sacrifice just seemed like too much. The stories I could tell you of people who started but weren't willing to finish, who began but didn't want to walk it out. And now they're not finishing what they started. That's the story of Orpah. She started this journey, this life for others, but she didn't finish it. And friend, if you're going to be someone who lives for others, you're going to be someone who walks through this life with generosity and blessing coming out of you, because it truly is the better way to live, and it truly is the calling of God on our lives as to how to live. You've got to understand that not everyone who starts is going to finish. Some of you can probably remember some people who started with you on this journey, who have since said, I don't know if I'm about that journey anymore. That doesn't disparage the journey or the calling. It just means not everyone who starts finishes. And also write this down. Not everyone who cries commits. There's this beautiful moment, we just read about it, where the sisters-in-law and their mother-in-law, as their mother-in-law is pouring her heart out, Naomi is like, you don't need to do this. You have your whole life in front of you. And they're hugging one another on this road to Judah after they've left Moab, and they're crying together. Where Orpah shares the tears of her sister, the tears of her mother-in-law. But the difference is she shared tears with her sister, but not the same commitment to the work. Now, please understand, that doesn't make Orpah a bad person. But she wasn't willing to live her life for others like that. You know, it's easy to be moved to tears through communication about the realities in our city, the realities in a neighborhood, the realities in a school, the things that we've seen for years, for decades, for generations. It's easy to be moved to tears when statistics are given, or you walk into places that people live not in some other country, but they literally live 15 minutes from you, 12 minutes from you, 4 blocks from you, and the conditions that they find themselves living in, you couldn't wrap your mind around living. It's easy to be moved to tears. It's easy to hear about kids who need toys at Christmas, to hear about families who, without somebody else's generosity, would not have enough food to eat. It's easy to be moved to tears over these plights and realities. But it's a whole nother thing to roll up your sleeves and volunteer. It's a whole nother thing to set in your personal budget, in your company's budget, in the foundation's budget, money that we say we're going to invest in that work. To mobilize using your influence, to mobilize using your connections and your ability to make a difference. See, it's one thing to feel it to where it moves you to tears. It's a whole other thing to commit to the work, no matter what. People who live for others understand that not everyone who starts finishes, but not everyone who commits, who cries, commits. Not everyone who shares tears with you will be committed to the work like you. And that's okay. They again, like Orpah, aren't a bad person. You just have to recognize, if you're going to be someone who does live for others, that not everyone who is sitting in that room with you, not everyone who had those tears rolling down their cheek when they heard about those realities, not everyone who felt something in their heart when the vision was cast will be committed to the vision like you will, Ruth. Because not everyone who cries commits. And there's one more reality for those of us who would live for others that I need to warn you about. That this little instance in Ruth and Orpah and Naomi's journey must be pointed out so that you would see it and know it in your own neighborhood. But not everyone who receives welcomes. What do you do when the people you're called to push you away? What do you do when the neighborhood, when the person, when the family, when the group of people, that you know you are called to push you away? Do you question your calling, or do you question their response? I know what some of you think. Yeah, oh man, that was too hard. You ever heard somebody talk about a neighborhood, talk about a city, talk about an effort, talk about, oh, it was too hard. Oh, you got sad because they didn't throw you a parade after your one day of community service. I'm so sorry. Can I talk to you for a second about people who've complained to me while receiving help from us? Oh, you ain't ready for the real. That's okay. I'm going to bring it up into your neighborhood. I have had people who literally, we are mowing their lawn because their lawn was out of control, who have told us, oh yeah, came to the church, your music's too loud. What? We out here mowing your grass and you're complaining to me that, I scream too much during the sermon? I'm a little too Pentecostal for your particular palate? Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I have had people, I'm not making I could fill the rest of my time with stories that would shock you. I have had people call us after receiving groceries that we paid for, that we served them, that we loaded into their car, blessed them, and sent them on the way. We have had people call us and complain to us about what it is we put in their car. We have had people call us and complain that they thought that we shorted them. How can you short somebody when you're giving them something for free? I don't understand. I don't understand. We have had people complain to us while receiving from us. Why don't you can go look right now, because it happens every time we promote anything. People ask why we don't do it differently. Well, it was easier when you did the grocery sign-ups and people could sign up online. Why you make it so hard? We make it hard. You have to come by the building and fill out a form. It takes 5 minutes. So that you can come back in 10 minutes and we can load your groceries up and send you along the way rather than sitting in line for 8 hours. I don't understand. But I do understand that Ruth understands. Ruth understands what it's like to have the very people you're called to serve, the very person you're called to serve, do everything in her power to push you away. But Ruth didn't question her calling like many of us did. Ruth didn't back down from the work she had set out to do. She was unwilling to let Naomi's pushing her away stop her from doing what she believed she was called and supposed to do for others. Here's the way the story continues, verse 15. Look, Naomi said to her, talking about Ruth, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. You should do the same. If it wasn't clear up to now that that Naomi is trying to send Ruth away and trying to say, I know you're trying to live your life for me, and I know you're trying to like rock with me. You need to go back. It's for your own good. But Ruth replied, don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And may the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. Now, people love that line. In fact, if you're even slightly familiar with the book of Ruth, that's probably the line you're familiar with. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Woo! To me, the striking line is the next one. The one that the writer, the narrator, if you will, helps us to grasp after this proclamation from Ruth to her mother-in-law that she is burdened and called to serve. Listen to what it says. It says, when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. Naomi, who had consistently pushed and challenged and tried to do everything in her power to get her daughter-in-law to go back home. So much so that she got one of the two. One of the two, that they were all there crying together. And she convinced one, but could not convince the other. And when she saw the determination in Ruth, she said, all right, no more. See, that's the thing that the people that we are called to serve need to see in you and see in me. The others that the Spirit of God may lead you to, may call you to, the others in our neighborhood, the others in your family, the others in our city, that God would call us to serve and call us to reach and call us to care for. You need to understand what they need to see. They may be trying to push you away right now, but what they need to see is determination on the inside of you. Because it's determination, it's that commitment that moves us greater depths of living for others. You know, throughout this series, we have been looking at this continuum of devotion, this continuum of commitment in living for others. It's a response that we make to the call of God, the call of Scripture to live our lives for others. Some people say they can't. Your response has been, some of you remember part one, as we explained this in depth, you respond with, I can't do it. I got all these reasons why I can't. Or your response is, I could do it, but you got all these excuses as to why you won't do it. Or you say, I'll do it when it's convenient. And so when the schedule breaks, or you got extra money, or got extra, then you will. Or you move into the consistent frame where you say, you know what? I'm going to start to prioritize this work. I'm going to start to prioritize this effort. So through my finances, through my energy, through my time, through my gifting, I will serve, I will bless consistently. And then there's a level some people move to that is costly. That even though it may require much of me, I'm willing. Can I tell you the key to moving through this? Because the reason most people don't get too consistent and don't get too costly, they spend their lives talking about how they can't, spend their lives, even though they say they love Jesus, talking about how they could, but they won't. Or they spend their lives thinking they're doing something for God, but they only do it when it's convenient. Thinking they're doing something for others, but they only do it when it's convenient. And they never move into consistent, and they never move into costly. Can I tell you the primary reason they never get there isn't because of desire. It's because of a lack of determination. They want to. In fact, some of you, that's been your story even in this series. You have had the bravery to sit in, to listen, to lean in. The problem is you know you're in the could category. And you always talk about what you could do, but never what you will do. And so it's a won't from you. I could serve. I could give. I could help. I could lead, but I won't. And it's not that you don't have a desire in you to do more. You're just waiting for something to happen. You're waiting for your schedule to change in somewhere where you have the free time that in your mind you will then use for God and his purposes. Or you're waiting till you have a certain amount of money coming in, and then you're going to start. That's what you tell yourself. It's not that you don't have a desire, because all of that, trying to figure it out, that is desire. The problem is you don't have the determination to move from there to there. Can I tell you what God is looking for, though? God is looking for people with determination, that when they don't feel like it, that even when the money is tight, that even when people you're serving are ungrateful, that even though I've invited them to church 100 times and they keep saying no, I will not back down. I will not quit because I am determined. Because what determination does, write it down. It continues when desire ceases. There will be days that your desire will not be there. Your desire to give, your desire to share, your desire to leverage this time, to leverage this season for others. When the desire ceases, determination continues. Because I am determined. Doesn't matter how you respond, I'm determined. Doesn't matter what my bank account says, I am determined. It doesn't matter how I feel this morning, I am determined. Determination continues when desire ceases. And determination does when desire doesn't. See, determination be about that action. Desire doesn't. Desire says, I want to. Desire says, I'd like to. Desire says, oh, that looks interesting. But it's determination that actually does day in and day out. It's determination that actually does week in and week out. It's determination that actually does month in, month out, year in, year out. And then over time, you look at the massive difference made for others. And it didn't come from a desire. It came from determination. See, living for others isn't the easy road. And that's why you got to know what God said do, put your head down, and do it. And that is the very thing that Ruth does. And she finally told Naomi, listen, it doesn't matter what you're saying, because your people about to be my people. Your God about to be my God. Wherever they bury you, they're going to bury me right next to you. And if I don't live up to this, may God strike me down. And then Naomi sees her determination and says, all right, let's do this together. And so they make their way to Judah. And they get there, they get settled in some way. We're not given a ton of the details. But after being settled, they realize very quickly, we need something to sell. We need something to eat. Cause we got rents to pay and we ain't got nothing in these cupboards to eat. Like, we got to figure this thing out. And so here's the way this figuring it out happened. Chapter 2, starting in verse 2, it says, one day Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go out into the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who's kind enough to let me do it. They're in Judah. They see these people harvesting, and Ruth is like, I'm young. Let me go see what I can do. Naomi replied, all right, my daughter, go ahead. So Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters. This was allowed. This was actually written into the law as being an acceptable practice, particularly for widows, which they both were. As it happened, she found herself working in a field that belonged to a man called Boaz, the relative of her father-in-law, Elimelech. There's a lot connected to that I don't have time to share with you today, but maybe another time we'll spend a block and talk about Ruth and we'll get there. While she was there, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you, he said. The Lord bless you, the harvesters replied. Then Boaz asked his foreman, who is that young woman over there? Who does she belong to? And the foreman replied, she's the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. And she asked me this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters. She has been hard at work ever since, except for a few minutes rest in the shelter. Boaz went over and said to Ruth, listen, my daughter, stay right here with us when you gather grain. Don't go to any other fields. Stay right behind the young women working in my field. See which part of the field they are harvesting, and then follow them. I have warned the young men not to treat you roughly. And when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water they have drawn from the well. Ruth fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. What have I done to deserve such kindness? She asked. I'm only a foreigner. Yes, I know, Boaz replied. But I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I have heard how you left your father and mother and your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done. Oh, that's a beautiful moment. Because here is this young woman walking out her commitment to live for others, doing whatever she could. And what she's done is seen and commended. Can I tell you something about the blessing of God in your life? Because people love it when you preach on God's blessing. They don't love it when you preach on for others. They don't love it when you would encourage them to live life generously with your time, generously with your strength, generously with the money God entrusts you, generously with every resource and connection. People don't like that, but they love it when you talk about the blessing of God. Well, you about to love it, except you ain't. God's blessing will find you when you're not looking for God's blessing. Can I tell you about the blessing of God? Can I tell you about the favor of God today? His blessing will find you. His favor will find you when you're not looking for his blessing. See, folk think they got to be in the room where it happens to have the blessing of God find them. No. The blessing of God will find you in the field when you put your head down and do the work. The blessing of God will find you in the classroom when you put your head down and do the work. The blessing of God will find you in the warehouse when you commit to your shift and you do the work. The blessing of God will find you in the office when you serve with all your might and you do it for others. The reason many never get blessed, though, is they're pursuing blessing, not purpose. The reason many people, maybe even you under the sound of my voice, never see the blessing of God in your life like Ruth saw it. You never see God surprise you with his favor, surprise you with his goodness, surprise you with his provision. It's because you're pursuing his favor. You're pursuing his provision rather than pursuing the purpose he put on you for others. If you pursue the purposes of God in the earth, if you live your life for others, if you make his work your work, you won't have to look for blessing. It'll look for you. I read somewhere that surely was the testimony. His goodness and his mercy will follow me all the days of my life. That if I make his purposes my purposes, if I make his work my work, if I would live my life for others, all I gotta do is turn around and I will see his favor following me. When I focus on doing what God's asked me to do for others, can I tell you this personally? His blessing and his favor finds me every time. I'm not saying I get it perfect, because sometimes I be praying way too much for his blessing. And sometimes I'd be praying way too much for his favor. When what I really need to pray is for strength to do the work for others. Because when I make that my prayer, and when I make that my aim, and when I make that my ambition, and when my effort goes to those things, can I tell you over and over and over and over and over again in my life, personally, in our church collectively, I have seen the blessing of God, the favor of God, that like Ruth makes me go, God, what on earth did we do to deserve your kindness like this? I've seen it over and over again. You know, I see it year after year in this season that we call Christmas Palooza. Because most will not understand the stuff, the work that it takes behind the scenes to do what we do for 3 nights in December. As we'll serve thousands of kids toys, as we'll serve hundreds of families groceries. You don't understand that it's work, it's asking, it's trying to connect with businesses who you get a sort of a lead on, who may have partnered with you in the past, and seeing if you would have the favor of God for them to walk along with you again. And sometimes they say yes, and sometimes they say no, and sometimes things change. And I always get stressed in this season too, being like, God, what are you gonna show up? And he always does. Because I'll not even be thinking about somebody, and they'll send me an email replying to something I'd sent them 2 months ago, saying, sorry it took so long, but I've been working on your behalf. And our company is going to donate this amount of dollars for the Christmas Palooza, or our company is going to donate that amount of dollars for the Christmas Palooza. There's only one catch. We can't call it Christmas Palooza because we got a lot of Jewish people at our company, but can we call it Holiday Palooza? Y'all call it whatever you want. We just going to call it Holiday Palooza, and we want to celebrate you, and we want to make you the nonprofit of the year. I know we're an institution, and we got a lot of Jewish leadership, but we want to make your Protestant church the nonprofit of the year if you're okay with it. When all we're doing is trying to run out and serve others and pursue the calling, the burden that God has placed on us uniquely. I see it over and over. I worry about one thing, and God will surprise from another direction. I saw it this week with a partner organization we have in the city. It's crazy how it happened, because we were just out here doing work that we've been doing since literally the summer that we got into this building, and COVID had shut down the world, and we said, all right, there's too much need around us. Let's just start serving. And so we started serving groceries, and we started serving meals to kids after school, and we started using our facility as a virtual learning site, and we just got in this. And some things have continued, and some things have grown, and some things have changed, and some things are not needed anymore, but we've kept living for others. And somewhere along the way, we connected with an organization that supports nonprofit work in the city, and they said, we love you, we believe in you, we want you to come and be a part of what we're doing. And we said, okay, yeah, send people our way. We're an equal opportunity helper. We'll help anybody. And then after a year of being partnered with them, they reached out to us and said, hey, we want to start paying you for the work that you do, because you're helping so many people. And so we want to start contributing to the church, to the work that you're doing in this way. Is that okay? And we said, yes, it's okay. Y'all want to give us money to do more ministry? Absolutely. Well, this week they sent us a letter, an email to be specific. And they said, hey, you're doing great work. Nobody does work like you do. And so what we want to do is something we're not doing for any other organization. But we want to double the amount of money that we send to you next year from what we sent to you this year, so you can do more good work for more people in this city. Don't tell me God's blessing can't find you, because I see it every day of my life. And the reason you don't see it is because you're looking for it. You missed it unless you caught it. See, it will find you, but you don't know where to find it. You pursue his work, you live for others, and I promise you, when you least expect it, when you're not looking for it, his favor will find you. And if you think this moment in Ruth's life was favor finding her, this can't even hold a candle to the real blessing of God on her life, because she chose to live for others. There's a lot in the relationship between Ruth and Boaz that I'm going to skip over. I could explain it to you sometime, but for the sake of time, I just want to go to the end of the book of Ruth, to the culmination of this story. From this moment that starts right here, as she has gone out into the fields just to serve her mother-in-law, who she has said, I'm committing to serve all the days of my life. I'm going to live my life for others. And so I'm going to go out into this field and work. And now she connects with this man named Boaz, who sees how she works and offers her great blessing. And he does much more for her. It's Ruth chapter 4, verse 13 that puts it this way. It says, so Boaz, same Boaz, took Ruth into his home, and she became his wife. When he slept with her, the Lord enabled her to become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son. Verse 17. The neighbor women said, now at last Naomi has a son again. And they named him Obed. Here's the good part. He became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. I don't know how well you know the scripture. I don't expect you to have genealogies memorized. But 14 generations before David became the greatest king that Israel would ever know, God made a promise to Abraham that the whole world was going to be blessed through you. And David's great-grandmother became a woman who was not of Jewish descent. She was grafted in by the purpose and providence of God. A woman named Ruth, who became the great-grandmother of King David, but who 28 generations after King David, at the fullness of time, the book of Matthew will tell us that God loved the world so much that he sent his son in human form and called his name Jesus. 31 generations before Jesus would step to this planet, there was a woman brought into the bloodline of Jesus himself who said, I ain't about to make my life all about me. I'm about to make my life about others. Ruth was grafted into the lineage of the Son of God because she was willing to live for others. But check this. This doesn't happen if she stays in Moab. If she concerns herself with what would have been easiest for her, this never happens. If she doesn't draw upon the determination to do the thing that God had set out for her to do, it does not happen. If somebody needs to catch this, if she wouldn't have worked the way that she worked, if she would have been out there in them fields complaining about, God, why I got to be out here working? Why can't you just send me a man? I'm out here trying to do side up by this old, rankly mother-in-law I got, and you can't even bring somebody to send some to our doorstep, so I ain't got to work like that. That ain't how she worked. She went out there and worked a difficult job with all her might, so much so that a foreman that didn't even know her said she'd been working. I mean, she took like a little 5-minute break over here in the shelter, but that's because we out here in the desert and it'd be hotter than the mug. But like, she has been working, and Boaz says, I see her, and there's something on her, and she deserves to be cared for. I heard her story, and she deserves to be blessed. But the thing I need you to see is the way the book of Ruth ends, with Ruth grafted into the family of God, becoming a matriarch in the bloodline of Jesus himself. She can't make that happen. If she wanted to, you can connive and twist and prop up to try to make some of this other stuff happen, but you can't do that. Only God can. And if you'll live your life for others, God can do stuff in your life that can't nobody take credit for, can't nobody give testimony about. They made it happen. They connected you to the person. There is some stuff that God will do in you and through you that he is the only one who can get credit for. But you got to choose to live for others. So how might God work through your life? How might God want to use you if you were to live fully for others? Because you decided, I'm going to be faithful to serve these kids. I'm going to be faithful to teach them about Jesus. I'm going to be faithful to be in their classroom week in, week out. I know they got turbulence at the house, but I'm going to be faithful to be there and love them and serve them. What if you gave of your time consistently and nobody thanked you, but you knew you were giving of your time for the glory of God and the good of others? What might he do? What if you consistently gave of your resources so people could be served, people could be reached, people could be shared with? What might God do for others through you, and what might God bring to you? because you weren't concerned about what God brought to you. You lived your life for others. The picture of generosity that everyone else sees, you said, I'm gonna make it look a little different. Can I tell you, friend, it's time to serve. It's time to serve. This is not time to back down. This is not time to come with excuses. It's time to serve. It's time to give. This is not time to talk about what I don't have and what I can't do and what I want. This is time to give. It's time to determine in our heart of hearts to set our face like flint, to bow our back and commit to never bend our knee, but to live our lives for the glory of God and the good of the others He has called us to. Would you join me in that? Come on, would you roll up your sleeves? Would you become as generous as you can be? Whether that's through a Here for Good offering, whether that's participating in Christmas Palooza, whether that's finding a team in the church to begin to serve on, whether it's doing all of that and more, would you commit to live for others? Father, I thank you today for the great testimony that Ruth gives us. And my prayer today is that there would be dozens of us, hundreds of us, who would hear this word and not back down, not move ourselves away from it, but we would step into it with lives marked by devotion to you for others. Father, I pray you bless us, you use us, you strengthen us to do all that you have set out to do for your honor and for your glory most of all. We pray all this, Jesus, in your name. And everybody said, amen.